They didn't lock her away because she was guilty. They locked her away because she was dangerous, and they knew exactly what she'd become if she survived. What they never counted on was him. If forbidden bonds, alpha kings, and girls who were never meant to be chosen make your heart race, subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't go anywhere. This story is just getting started. The morning of a mating ceremony was supposed to smell like pine smoke and white blossoms. Instead, Celine stood barefoot against cold stone, her simple linen dress still unlaced at the back, while laughter drifted through the half-open doorway ahead of her. Low, intimate, familiar enough to make her stomach tighten instantly. She told herself it meant nothing, that nerves were twisting ordinary sounds into cruel shapes. But her wolf went completely still inside her chest, the way animals go still seconds before the earth begins to break apart beneath them. Then she heard his voice. Caius, her fiancé, soft in a way he had never once been with her. After tonight, he murmured quietly, she won't be a problem anymore. The pack will never question a condemned wolf. Celine stopped breathing. The words did not hit all at once. They settled slowly inside her, heavy, cold, irreversible. Her fingers pressed flat against the corridor wall, as though the stone itself was the only thing keeping her upright. She did not move, did not run. Some instinct deeper than fear held her there listening, while the world she thought she understood quietly dismantled itself on the other side of the door. Then Mira laughed softly. Her sister's voice carried the calm cruelty of someone who had been preparing this moment for a very long time. She'll be sent to the cursed tower before moonrise, Mira said. By the time anyone starts asking questions, your position will already be secured. And I'll be standing where she was always supposed to stand. A pause followed, the quiet sound of fabric shifting. Then, she was never meant for this destiny, Caius. The moon mark made her a stain on the bloodline the moment she was born. Celine lowered her eyes automatically toward the faint silver mark resting against the inside of her wrist. The mark her mother once kissed gently while calling it beautiful. The mark the elders refused to explain. A stain. Her wolf clawed hard against her ribs now, not rage, not yet. Grief, sharp enough to feel physical. Mira had braided her hair the night before, had smiled at her across dinner candles, had kissed her cheek and whispered good luck like any part of this had ever been real. Celine stepped backward once. Then again. She was 3 steps from the servants' staircase when the main corridor doors burst open. 2 pack guards entered first, wearing heavy iron armor, followed closely by Elder Doran in immaculate grey robes. His expression already carried the careful neutrality of a man arriving to perform a task decided long before he entered the room. Celine of the Ashvale bloodline, he announced loudly enough for nearby servants to freeze where they stood. You are hereby accused of theft against the crown, specifically the removal of the moon relic from the sacred vault. Celine stared at him. I've never entered the sacred vault. The evidence has already been presented before the council, Doran replied calmly, not even looking at her directly. That was the moment she understood. This was not an accusation. It was procedure. The verdict already existed. The trial simply had not caught up to it yet. I want to speak before the council, Celine said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. I have the right to defend myself. Doran finally lifted his eyes toward her. No anger lived there. No hesitation either. Only the tired patience of someone mildly inconvenienced by resistance. The council has already convened, child. The decision has been made. Then unmake it. Celine shot back immediately. Bring me before them. Make them look me in the eyes while they call me a thief. One of the guards stepped forward before Doran could answer. The iron gauntlet closed firmly around her arm. Cold metal against bare skin. Final. At the far end of the corridor, the mating ceremony candles still burned quietly beneath white flowers and silver cloth. The altar remained untouched, waiting for a ritual that was never going to happen. For one strange second, Celine found herself staring at the flowers more than the guards, at how normal everything still looked while her entire life collapsed around it. Then they dragged her away. The lower courtyard stood crowded with wolves from her own pack, watching silently from the edges of the stone path. Celine searched their faces while the guards forced her forward. People she had grown beside. People who had eaten at her family's table during hard winters. Wolves whose children she had carried medicine to during sickness. Some looked away immediately. Others met her eyes only briefly before dropping their gaze toward the ground. Not one of them stepped forward. Not one of them spoke her name. That was when the betrayal became larger than Caius and Mira. Larger than the false accusation. This silence, practiced, collective, careful, felt colder than any cruelty spoken aloud. Caius had wounded her. Mira had betrayed her. But this felt different. This felt like erasure. As though every memory tied to her was being quietly revoked in real time. Her wolf howled soundlessly inside her chest, while Celine kept her spine straight and her expression empty. They would take her freedom, her future, her name. She would not give them her humiliation too. The transport wagon waited beyond the gates. And behind it, rising against the pale morning sky, stood the cursed tower, black stone, impossible height, windows dark as empty eyes. Even from this distance, Celine felt it. A pressure deep beneath her sternum. A wrongness in the air itself. The wolves around her avoided looking directly at the tower. Even the guards kept their attention fixed ahead while unease tightened their movements. But Celine stared at it openly because she had nothing left to lose and nowhere else left to look. Then it happened. A sudden pull deep inside her chest. Sharp, ancient, alive. Not breaking, not snapping, pulling. As though somewhere impossibly far away, something had finally awakened and realized she existed. And for the first time in 20 years, the sleeping bond began to answer back. The cursed tower did not roar or growl. That was the first thing Celine noticed, and somehow the most terrifying. It simply swallowed her whole in silence, the iron door slamming shut behind her with a sound so final it felt less like imprisonment and more like burial. The cell was small, the walls impossibly thick. A single narrow window sat too high to reach and too thin to matter. Cold radiated from the stone itself, not the cold of winter air, but the deeper kind that settles inside places abandoned by warmth long ago. Celine pressed her back against the wall and waited for her wolf to rise, that instinctive surge she had always felt whenever danger came close. Nothing answered. No heat, no movement beneath her ribs. Only silence where her wolf used to be, and the slow realization that the pack had not simply locked her away. They had sent her somewhere designed to erase her completely. By the second day, small things began disappearing. A clear memory of her mother's face blurred before she could hold on to it. Warmth, dark hair, lavender, then nothing. Certain words dissolved halfway through her thoughts. She paced the cell endlessly, counting steps beneath her breath, forcing herself to speak out loud simply to hear proof that her voice still existed. "You're still here," she whispered one night, both palms pressed flat against the freezing stone. "You're still thinking. That means they haven't won yet." The tower answered her the same way it answered everything, with indifferent silence. She could feel it working slowly against her mind, patient as rust eating through iron, not destroying her all at once, wearing her down carefully, piece by piece, until there would be nothing left worth remembering. Her wolf had retreated somewhere impossibly distant now, hidden behind layers of cold and stone and exhaustion. And for the first time since the betrayal, Celine became truly afraid. Not of dying, of disappearing so completely that nobody would ever know she had existed at all. That fear was what made her start studying the walls. Not hope. Hope felt dangerous here, but stubbornness survived longer than hope ever did. Celine ran her fingers slowly across every inch of stone she could reach, reading the darkness through touch instead of sight. The marks revealed themselves gradually, grooves carved deep into the walls by claws. Nails, broken hands desperate enough to leave proof behind. She traced them carefully until patterns emerged from the chaos. Names, dates, fragments of unfinished sentences left behind by wolves who had once occupied the same cell before the tower consumed them. Most ended abruptly. The pack doesn't know. Tell her I never. If anyone finds this, I was. Celine sat slowly against the wall afterward, knees drawn tightly toward her chest, while silence pressed around her from every direction. They had fought too. Every prisoner before her had tried to leave evidence that they were real before the tower stripped even that away from them. And eventually the darkness had won, one memory at a time, one word at a time. She almost missed the prophecy completely. Her fingers brushed over the carving twice before she realized the marks felt different, deeper, cleaner, deliberate in a way the others were not. It rested low against the far corner of the wall beneath layers of dirt and age, hidden carefully enough that only someone searching desperately would ever notice it. Celine crouched beside it slowly, scraping grime away with her thumbnail until faint moonlight from the high window finally caught the letters properly. Then she read them. The one rejected by the pack shall bear the moon mark of the old blood. The alpha of shadows will climb without permission. What the council condemned, the bond will crown. Celine read the words again, then once more. Her heartbeat felt strangely uneven now, suspended somewhere between fear and recognition. Deep beneath the silence consuming her, her wolf gave a single low response. Faint, ancient, awake enough to recognize truth when it heard it. A prophecy, Celine whispered into the darkness. The sound almost made her laugh. Of course the answers would be buried inside a cursed prison where nobody was meant to survive long enough to find them. Of course destiny would wait until she had lost nearly everything before revealing itself half-hidden beneath dirt and darkness. She pressed trembling fingers against the carved words once more. The alpha of shadows. The bond will crown. She did not fully understand them yet. She did not know who carved the prophecy or whether they survived long enough to escape the tower afterward. But the words carried weight. The kind that settles deep inside your bones before your mind has time to argue against it. And for the first time since arriving there, Celine stopped counting the days. Because something was coming. The prophecy promised it. And whoever climbed the tower would not care about permission, councils, iron doors, or curses old enough to frighten wolves into silence. Celine did not sleep that night. She sat with her back pressed against the prophecy like it was armor, pale eyes fixed on the thin line of moonlight stretching across the floor from the high window above. The moon mark on her wrist had begun aching steadily now, not pain exactly, but a deep pulse beneath her skin, slow and alive like a second heartbeat waking after years of silence. She pressed her thumb against it carefully and felt warmth for the first time since entering the tower. "What are you?" she whispered softly. To the mark, to the prophecy, to the darkness itself. Nothing answered, but the warmth did not disappear. It pulsed again. Steadier this time. Like something at the other end of a very long thread had suddenly shifted. Far beyond the tower, beneath the frozen skies of the north, the Alpha King opened his eyes in the dark. And this time, the bond no longer felt distant. It felt like a command. The grand hall of the northern keep was the kind of room that swallowed sound. Stone walls 3 feet thick, iron torches burning low along every column, the long war table covered in maps, border disputes, and the careful bloodless language of pack politics. Ragnar Silverfang sat at the head of it all, 7 feet of iron discipline wrapped in black battle armor, a heavy fur cape across his shoulders dark as a storm front, amber eyes moving across the assembled elders with the controlled patience of a man who had learned long ago that panic solved absolutely nothing. He had not spoken in nearly 20 minutes. He rarely needed to. The Alpha King's silence had always carried more weight than most men's speeches. Elder Crest was midway through another discussion about Southern Territory disputes when Ragnar's hand suddenly slammed flat against the war table hard enough to rattle every cup in the room. Not anger, shock. His amber eyes widened instantly, wide in a way none of the elders had ever witnessed before, and the sound that escaped his chest was neither growl nor word. It was roar than either. Older, the sound of something inside the Alpha King awakening violently without permission. The bond hit him like a blade between the ribs. Not pain exactly. More devastating than pain. Recognition. Sudden and absolute, like a buried instinct dragged awake after sleeping for years beneath ice and stone. Ragnar did not consciously understand what he was feeling yet, but his wolf understood immediately. It surged upward inside him like a war beast, hearing the first horn of battle, claws scraping violently beneath his skin with desperation that had nothing to do with bloodlust. He saw flashes. A girl, dark hair falling loose across pale skin, a torn linen dress, stone walls closing tightly around her, darkness thick enough to feel wrong, and her wolf, gods, her wolf fading slowly like fire suffocating beneath ash, weak and flickering and dangerously close to disappearing entirely. Your Majesty. Elder Crest's voice sounded distant now, drowned beneath the force of the bond tearing through Ragnar's chest. Your Majesty, are you quiet? Ragnar's voice barely rose above a whisper. That frightened the room far more than shouting would have. He pressed both fists hard against the table and forced himself to breathe through the violent flashes still tearing across his mind, cold stone beneath her hands. Moonlight barely reaching the floor, her lips moving silently in the darkness as though speaking words he could almost hear. Every instinct inside him pointed south, now with brutal certainty. Like a compass snapping violently toward true north, except north was wrong. South was where she was. South was where the bond was breaking. Someone, Ragnar said quietly, is inside the cursed tower. The room fell completely silent. Elder Crest exchanged a long glance with Elder Morn across the table, the kind of look carrying entire conversations inside it. Concern, calculation, fear. The careful uncertainty of men realizing the Alpha King was reacting to something beyond the limits of ordinary politics. Sire, Morn said cautiously, the cursed tower falls under the jurisdiction of the Southern Pack. Any interference would violate the treaty of... I didn't ask about the treaty. Ragnar rose slowly to his full height. In black armor and dark fur, he did not need to raise his voice to make the hall feel suddenly too small. The torches dimmed against the walls. The air itself seemed colder around him. I asked. Ragnar continued, amber eyes settling on Morn with the absolute focus of a predator, deciding whether restraint remained worth the effort. If anyone in this room knows who is being held inside that tower. Silence answered him. Ragnar nodded once. That's what I thought. Then he began removing his gauntlets. Your Majesty. Elder Crest stood abruptly from his chair, notable entirely because Elder Crest had not moved quickly for anything in nearly 40 years. What you're experiencing may feel urgent, but bond responses can be controlled. There are protocols, procedures. If this truly is a bond awakening, then the proper course is to remain here while we investigate through diplomatic. She's dying. The two words landed heavily across the hall. Flat. Certain, final, not emotional, not dramatic. Fact. The bond is already thinning, Ragnar continued quietly while setting both gauntlets against the war table. Whatever that tower is doing to her, it's killing her faster than expected. He looked toward the elders one final time. So, I'm leaving. You cannot abandon a council session, I know. The Southern treaties explicitly prohibit northern intervention, I know. An Alpha King cannot transform before the council in the middle of a diplomatic. The sound of bone cracking violently through the hole ended the sentence. Power surged outward hard enough to shake the torches against the walls as Ragnar Silverfang, Alpha King of the North, ruler of 11 packs, the man who had not revealed his wolf form in a political chamber for 15 years, transformed directly in front of them. Massive black fur exploded through the space where the man had stood seconds earlier, amber eyes blazing against the torchlight with terrifying intelligence and absolutely no remaining patience for diplomacy. The great wolf stared at the assembled elders in complete silence. The message required no translation. He was gone before anyone fully reacted. Through the hall doors, across the frozen courtyard, into the northern night with 3 members of his personal guard scrambling after him in alarm. Ragnar shifted back into human form only once he reached the stables, mounting his black war horse with the fluid efficiency of a man who had spent most of his life riding toward battlefields. Bren, his second in command, caught up beside him moments later wearing the controlled expression of someone trying very hard to prioritize which question mattered most. South, Ragnar ordered immediately. Bren blinked once. How far south? Ragnar's amber eyes fixed on the dark horizon ahead. All the way. Bren understood the difference instantly. Crossing into southern territory implied diplomacy, permission, negotiation. Arriving meant something entirely different. Arriving was what happened when the Alpha King had already decided the thing waiting at the destination belonged to him. Ragnar rode through the entire first night without stopping. His black war horse tore across frozen ground mile after mile while mountain winds snapped violently against the heavy fur cape streaming behind him. His guard followed in tight silence because they recognized that expression on their king's face, the one that meant every calculation had already been completed and only time remained between him and violence. Inside Ragnar's chest, the bond pulled harder with every passing mile, warm beneath armor and cold air alike. Alive, he could still see her through the flashes, sitting against stone walls, head bowed slightly, her wolf barely visible now beneath layers of darkness and exhaustion. But she had not surrendered, had not stopped fighting. Even through distance and the fractured connection between them, Ragnar could feel the relentless defiance inside her, quiet, exhausted, absolutely unbroken. And that realization ignited something dangerous inside him that had nothing to do with prophecy, politics, or bloodlines. He did not know her name yet, did not know the sound of her voice beyond fragmented whispers through the bond. But she was his Luna. And the cursed tower had made one catastrophic mistake. It locked her inside without understanding who would come for her afterward. Ragnar Silverfang was already riding south. And deep in his chest, the bond carried only one certainty now. Those walls would not be enough. The storm struck the same hour Ragnar reached the southern valley. Lightning split the sky in long white fractures, illuminating the cursed tower one violent flash at a time, and every strike made it look worse than before. Taller, darker, wrong in a way that pressed directly against instinct. His horse refused to move beyond the tree line, muscles locked tight beneath the saddle, eyes wide with an animal fear that had nothing to do with thunder. Ragnar dismounted without a word and handed the reins to Bren, who stared toward the tower with the expression of a man calculating very quickly whether survival remained realistic tonight. "You're going in there alone?" Bren asked quietly, not protest. Confirmation. Ragnar tightened the straps of his gauntlets with sharp, efficient movements. "The curse feeds on pack energy," he said. "More wolves mean more power for it. I go alone." "Sire, stay here. Keep the horses calm. If I'm not out by dawn." He stopped briefly, amber eyes lifting toward Bren with the plain honesty of a man who had never made promises lightly. "I'll be out by dawn," Ragnar said instead. Then he turned and walked directly into the storm while rain hammered against black armor and the tower waited ahead like something alive enough to recognize him coming. The first guards intercepted him before he reached the outer gate. 6 southern wolves in full armor, spears lowered immediately, their captain stepping forward with the practiced authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed here. Restricted ground. The captain barked over the storm. By order of the Southern Council, nobody enters the... Ragnar never slowed down. He walked directly into the lowered spears, and the guards discovered very quickly there was a significant difference between stopping ordinary wolves and stopping the Alpha King of the North after 3 sleepless days and a bond tearing itself apart inside his chest. The captain tried once more. To his credit, he truly tried. "I am ordering you to stand down. Move." 1 word. Low. Absolute. The captain finally looked properly into Ragnar's amber eyes, and whatever he saw there made instinct overpower pride immediately. He stepped aside first. The others followed without argument, because there were things training prepared wolves for, and there were things instinct recognized as survival. The Alpha King crossing your gates during a lightning storm with that expression on his face belonged entirely to the second category. The curse struck Ragnar the moment he crossed the threshold. He had expected resistance, a warning, pressure, the magical equivalent of a locked door. What he had not expected was how personal it felt, like something ancient buried inside the tower had looked directly at him and decided to fight back. Cold flooded through his armor instantly, sinking through iron and leather straight into bone. His wolf snarled in response without hesitation, furious, focused, absolutely unwilling to retreat. And Ragnar used that furious fuel while climbing the first staircase with one hand against the wall and his jaw locked tight against the crushing pressure pressing downward from above. The higher he climbed, the worse it became. 2nd floor. His vision blurred briefly around the edges. 3rd floor. Memories surfaced that were not his. Firelight. A woman's voice. A language older than any modern pack. 4th floor. The cold became something beyond temperature entirely. Something pressing quietly against his mind, trying to convince him that none of this mattered anymore. That she was already gone. That he was already too late. Ragnar stopped halfway across the landing, one fist pressed hard against the wall while breathing through the pressure threatening to split his concentration apart. "You're lying," he said aloud into the darkness. To the curse. To the tower. To whatever ancient thing lived inside these walls feeding on despair for centuries. "She's still alive. I can feel her." Then he kept climbing. Through the bond, he could feel her fading. But worse than that, he could feel her fighting it. That detail hit him harder than the curse ever could. She had not surrendered. Even now, with her wolf nearly extinguished and her memories slipping away piece by piece into the dark, some core part of her still refused to disappear quietly. Still resisted. Still fought to remain herself. The 5th floor landing brought Ragnar face to face with a chained iron door, and beyond it, faint but unmistakable, the bond pulled sharply against his chest. Warm, thin, desperate. Ragnar did not search for keys. He drove his shoulder into the door, once with the full force of armor, fury, exhaustion, and instinct behind it. The chains snapped apart with a sound like something sacred breaking. Beyond it stretched a narrow corridor darker than the storm outside, and at the very end stood one final door, thick oak reinforced with black iron bands and sealed with something far older than wood or metal. Ragnar could feel the curse concentrated there, dense and deliberate like the tower itself had gathered every ounce of strength for this final resistance. He placed both gauntleted hands against the door and felt it pushing back against him. "I know you're in there," Ragnar said quietly. His voice had changed now. Softer. Stripped entirely of command. Carrying something dangerously close to fear beneath it. "Hold on. I'm almost there." The door exploded inward. Not elegantly. Not cleanly. With raw force violent enough to splinter wood across the stone floor while bent iron screamed outward, and the curse itself recoiled like something suddenly reminded what an Alpha King truly was. Ragnar stepped into darkness, so complete he felt it before he saw it, and for one terrible second the bond nearly vanished altogether, thin as thread, barely holding, and his heart lurched hard enough to bypass 15 years of discipline instantly. "Hey!" His voice came out rougher than intended. Lower, human in a way almost nobody ever heard from him anymore. "Hey, stay with me. I'm here." He found her more by instinct than sight, curled against the far wall, dark hair loose and tangled, pale skin nearly blending into the cold stone around her. Ragnar crossed the room immediately and dropped to one knee in front of her. Celine lifted her head slowly, and even through the darkness her eyes found his with impossible accuracy. Then the bond detonated. There was no softer word for it. Not awakening, not recognition. Detonation. The force of it tore through the tower like something ancient finally breaking free after 20 years trapped beneath pressure. Stone cracked overhead. Dust rained down through the darkness. The curse recoiled violently through the walls themselves, and Ragnar Silverfang, Alpha King of the North, ruler of 11 packs, the man who had not truly been surprised by anything in over a decade, remained completely still on his knees before her while one devastating realization settled into place inside him with absolute clarity. His entire life had just divided itself into before this moment and after it. Celine stared at him silently. Ragnar stared back. Outside, the storm still ripped across the valley with thunder, lightning and violent rain hammering the tower walls. Inside the shattered silence of the cell, neither of them moved. Her exhausted eyes searched slowly across his face like she was still deciding whether he was real or simply another dream created by isolation and darkness. Ragnar let her look. Didn't rush her. Didn't speak. He stayed exactly where he was, one knee against the stone floor, armor dripping rainwater, dark fur heavy across his shoulders, amber eyes fixed entirely on her with a steadiness that had nothing to do with patience anymore. Finally, in a voice scraped raw by silence, cold and exhaustion, Celine whispered the only thing that made sense. "You're really here." Ragnar's expression shifted almost invisibly. "Yeah," he said softly. "Not your majesty. Not an explanation. Not a declaration. Just yeah." Quiet and absolute and somehow heavier than either of them knew how to carry yet. Slowly, Ragnar reached for her hand. His gauntleted fingers, huge, armored, built for war, closed carefully around hers with a gentleness that seemed to surprise even him, and the moon mark on Celine's wrist blazed silver-white in the darkness, flooding the ruined cell with light like a held breath finally released. Ragnar carried her out of the cursed tower, the way men carry things they have already decided they will never let go of again. Not carefully in the fragile sense, carefully in the absolute sense, one arm beneath her knees, the other steady against her back while his armored body blocked the worst of the rain and wind from reaching her. Celine did not protest. Pride had lost the argument somewhere around the 4th day, trapped inside the tower with her wolf fading into silence. Besides, something about the way Ragnar moved made resistance feel irrelevant. Calm, certain, as though carrying her through a storm was not a dramatic act at all, but simply the next obvious thing that needed to happen. The bond between them pulsed warm beneath her ribs now, enormous and strange, and far too alive for the size of her chest. She could feel Ragnar's heartbeat through the armor pressed against her cheek. Slow, steady, infuriatingly calm, in a way that kept dragging her own pulse toward its rhythm. "You don't have to carry me," Celine murmured eventually, mostly because it felt important to establish she still possessed opinions, despite barely being able to remain conscious upright. Ragnar glanced down at her briefly. "I know," he said. He did not put her down. The southern pack waited at the base of the tower. At least 30 wolves stood armed across the courtyard in tight formation, rain hammering against iron armor and spear tips while torchlight flickered violently across wet stone. Their commander stepped forward the moment Ragnar descended the final stairs, carrying Selene against his chest. Broad shoulders, southern crest plated across iron armor, the careful expression of a man attempting to sound authoritative while fully aware he was speaking to the most feared alpha on the continent. Alpha King, the commander called over the storm. The girl is a condemned prisoner under authority of the Southern Council. By treaty, you are required to surrender her immediately. Ragnar stopped walking. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward the commander with the same cold indifference mountains reserve for weather. She's mine, Ragnar said. 2 words. Flat. Absolute. Like negotiation itself had become irrelevant. The commander's jaw tightened visibly. The Treaty of the Southern. Find another treaty, Ragnar replied. Then he kept walking. That was when the commander gave the signal. A single sharp movement of his hand. The wolves closed formation immediately. Ragnar stopped again. Slowly, carefully, he lowered Selene onto her feet while keeping one steady hand at her waist in case her strength failed entirely. Then he turned toward the advancing pack with the expression of a man who had already calculated the outcome and found it deeply unimpressive. But before anyone moved further, Selene pulled free from Ragnar's support and straightened painfully on her own. Every muscle in her body protested the movement. She ignored it. Then the moon mark exploded into light. Not the faint silver pulse from inside the tower. Something far older. Silver-white light burst across her skin in branching patterns that climbed from her wrist up her arm and across her collarbone like living moonfire. Ancient symbols spread through the storm-lit darkness in glowing lines too deliberate to be random, elegant, terrifying, unmistakably royal. The courtyard froze completely. 30 armed wolves stood motionless beneath the rain, while the silver light reflected across armor, stone, and stunned faces. Even the storm itself suddenly seemed quieter around her. Ragnar turned back towards Selene slowly, amber eyes widening in a way she was beginning to understand meant genuine surprise. Something that apparently almost never happened to him. That's not a moon mark, Ragnar said quietly. Not accusation. Recognition. He stepped toward her carefully and took her glowing wrist between both gauntleted hands with surprising gentleness, studying the branching silver patterns as rain slid from black armor onto the stone beneath them. The symbols remained visible long enough for him to read them properly, and from the look settling across his face, he understood exactly what he was seeing. This is the royal seal of the moon bloodline, Ragnar said, very softly now. The bloodline the Southern Pack declared extinct 30 years ago. Selene stared at him through the rain. What? Ragnar lifted his eyes toward hers. Who was your mother? The question struck deeper than she expected. Her throat tightened instantly around memories she had spent years trying unsuccessfully to hold onto warm hands, dark hair, lavender, lullabies half forgotten by time. She died when I was 4, Selene answered quietly. I never knew her full name. My father wouldn't talk about her. Then the pieces landed together all at once. The moon mark no elder could explain. The accusation prepared too quickly. Mira's hatred. The coordinated betrayal. The tower. Her sister's voice, whispering the bloodline, had always been an embarrassment. Selene's breathing slowed dangerously. They knew, she whispered. Ragnar's jaw hardened instantly. They always knew. Not one southern wolf had moved. Not one. The silver light spilling from Selene's skin had changed something in the air itself, something primal enough that 30 armed wolves suddenly seemed unwilling to become the first ones foolish enough to challenge it. Ragnar straightened slowly to his full height beside her, black armor gleaming beneath the rain, while his amber gaze moved across the assembled pack one face at a time with deliberate, unforgettable calm. You surrounded a dying woman at the base of a cursed tower. Your council locked her inside. Ragnar said quietly, not loud, not theatrical. Just clear in the terrible way truth becomes clear when spoken by someone powerful enough not to soften it. You pointed weapons at your true Luna. His gaze shifted toward the commander. And you demanded I return the last heir of the Moonblood line to the same people who tried to erase her. Silence answered him. Ragnar let it stretch for one long second before speaking again. So here's what happens next. His voice dropped slightly lower. Somehow that made every word heavier. You lower every weapon in this courtyard. You return to your council and explain that the Alpha King of the North has claimed the woman they condemned. Another pause. Rain hammered the stone around them. And then you get out of my way. Nobody stopped them. Not when Ragnar settled his heavy fur cape across Celine's shoulders. Not when he guided her through the courtyard. Not when Bren brought the horses forward silently beneath the storm. The southern wolves simply watched the Alpha King ride away with the woman they had tried to bury. Celine remained silent through the first mile. Ragnar did not pressure her to speak. He rode close beside her through the rain-dark forest, his massive frame blocking the worst of the wind naturally, without making any visible effort of it. His fur cape still rested around her shoulders, warm, heavy, carrying the scent of pine, iron, snowfall, and something underneath that belonged only to him. Celine kept her eyes forward and tried to organize the truths crashing through her mind into something survivable. Her mother, the Moonblood line, a prophecy old enough to reshape kingdoms. A destiny rejected, hidden, nearly erased by wolves terrified of what her existence meant. After a long silence, she finally asked quietly, "How long have you known about the Moonblood line?" Ragnar never looked away from the road ahead. "Since I was 12. And? My father told me they were extinct." Celine stared forward into the rain. He was wrong. "Yes," Ragnar said simply. Another silence settled between them. Then Celine glanced sideways toward him. Rain slid across the sharp lines of Ragnar's armor, while his amber eyes remained fixed forward, steady and unreadable beneath the storm. He looked exactly like what he was, an Alpha King who had abandoned a council, crossed the continent without sleep, climbed a cursed tower alone, and walked out carrying the woman everyone else had condemned. Untouchable, dangerous, absolute, and yet his hand rested close enough to hers on the reins that 2 inches would close the distance completely. He never moved it away. Against her wrist, the moon mark pulsed warm and steady beneath the darkness, like a promise that had been waiting years to fulfill itself. Because whatever the Southern Pack had tried to bury, whatever betrayal had tried to silence, the prophecy had never truly stopped moving toward this moment. And the Alpha King they feared most had just walked into the tower built to erase her, and walked back out with a queen. The North healed her in ways the South never had. Not quickly, nothing real healed quickly, but steadily, the way roots grow beneath frozen ground long before anyone notices the tree becoming impossible to move. Ragnar gave Celine a room in the highest tower of the northern keep, which she privately found ironic, and never once demanded conversation from her. For the first 3 days, she sat beside the fire wrapped in silence, while snow drifted endlessly beyond the windows. Ragnar appeared sometimes in the doorway still wearing armor, black fur heavy across his shoulders, amber eyes scanning the room automatically for threats before settling briefly on her. If everything looked stable, he would leave a bowl of hot food near the fire and walk away again, without asking questions she was not ready to answer. No pressure, no expectation to recover beautifully, just space. On the 4th morning, Celine finally came downstairs on her own and found Ragnar standing at the war table with Bren and 2 northern commanders, maps spread beneath torchlight, while low voices discussed border movements and southern alliances. Ragnar looked up when she entered. Something shifted across his face, almost too quickly to catch, subtle as firelight changing direction when a door opens nearby. Without speaking, He pulled out the chair beside him. Celine looked at it for one long second before sitting down. And just like that, without ceremony or permission, she became part of the table. "You should know," Ragnar said later that evening after the commanders left and Bren very diplomatically decided he suddenly had somewhere else to be, "that 3 southern packs have formally demanded your return for trial." He said it calmly, the same way he said most things, direct, stripped of dramatics, as though discussing weather instead of political threats. Celine sat across from him near the fire while untouched cups of something warm cooled slowly between scattered maps. She met his eyes steadily. "And what did you tell them?" Ragnar leaned back slightly in his chair. "No." Celine blinked once. "That's it." "Not entirely." A faint shift touched the corner of his mouth. "Barely there. I may have also suggested the next envoy arriving with that request would leave considerably shorter than when he arrived." Celine stared at him for a moment. Then, for the first time since the tower, something almost resembling a smile tugged briefly at her mouth. "You threatened a diplomatic messenger." "I clarified my position," Ragnar corrected calmly. "There's a distinction." "There really isn't." The near smile finally reached her eyes. Ragnar watched it happen with an expression she still could not fully read. Something quiet and focused and unexpectedly warm, and the bond between them hummed softly beneath her ribs like a steady flame finally learning how to breathe. The ancient enemies arrived on the 10th night. Not the southern pack this time. Something older. Something that had been hunting the moon bloodline since long before Celine's birth. Long before her mother disappeared into hiding carrying a bloodline powerful enough to threaten kingdoms. Ragnar stood atop the outer wall when the first alarm sounded across the keep, and Celine was only seconds behind him, carrying a northern blade borrowed from the armory and the unmistakable expression of someone who had spent 10 days deciding she was finished being the woman things happened to. Ragnar glanced toward her immediately. "You should stay inside." Celine tightened her grip on the sword. "You should have asked permission before climbing my tower." Ragnar actually turned fully toward her then. Amber eyes moved slowly across her face, the blade in her hand, the silver pulse already beginning beneath the moon mark on her wrist. Something complicated crossed his expression briefly. Not Alpha King now, not Commander, but something far more dangerous because it was personal. "Stay close," he said finally. Not an order. Just the only compromise left, when the alternative was watching her walk into danger alone. She was no longer the same woman who entered the tower. 10 days beneath northern skies, and a bond growing stronger by the hour had awakened something ancient inside her bloodline that neither of them fully understood yet. When the first enemy crossed the gate, Celine felt the power surge through her body before her mind caught up with what was happening. Heat flooded her veins instantly. The moon mark blazed white across her skin, branching upward in luminous patterns that spread beyond her wrist and collarbone and through her entire body like moonlight finally reclaiming something stolen from it long ago. The hollow places the tower had carved into her suddenly filled with something fierce and radiant and impossibly alive. The enemies hesitated the moment the light touched them. Some stepped backward instinctively. Others simply stared in open fear. Ragnar fought beside her with brutal efficiency, his sword moving in clean, decisive arcs, while his body remained constantly angled toward her without making it obvious. Not shielding her, never diminishing her, simply existing beside her like a wall that had chosen her side permanently. By the time the battle ended, rain mixed with blood across the stones beneath their feet, while northern wolves dragged the surviving attackers into chains. Ragnar turned towards Celine slowly, rain dripping from dark hair onto armor streaked with battle. His amber eyes moved across the glowing patterns, still fading along her skin. "You've been holding that back this entire time," he said quietly. Not accusation, realization. Celine looked down at her trembling hands. "I didn't know it was there." Ragnar studied her for another second with the focused expression of a man staring directly at something he had not finished understanding yet. Neither did I, he admitted softly. And for some reason, that honesty settled deeper inside her than any reassurance could have. The summit of Alphas convened beneath the largest full moon seen in generations. Every major pack leader on the continent gathered in the valley below Ragnar's keep after receiving a summons sealed personally by the Alpha King of the North, a summons containing no invitation to refuse. They arrived armored, wary, deeply unconvinced, their escorts spread carefully across the valley in measured territorial distances while tension rolled through the crowd in quiet waves. Selene stood at Ragnar's right side beneath the moonlight, wearing a dress still simple by choice, though the moon mark burning silver across her skin made simplicity feel almost ceremonial now. The faint branching patterns of the moon bloodline glowed softly across her collarbones like ancient constellations written directly onto flesh. She stood straight. She had learned inside the tower how to stand straight even while breaking apart. Ragnar looked slowly across the gathered Alphas, amber eyes moving from face to face, while silence spread naturally around him, the kind of silence preceding things that could never be unsaid afterward. Then Ragnar Silverfang went down on one knee. The valley froze. Not polite silence. Not ceremonial silence. Shock. Pure stunned disbelief spreading outward through hundreds of wolves all at once. An Alpha King did not kneel. Not for treaties. Not for politics. Not for performance. The only thing powerful enough to bring an Alpha King to one knee willingly was his Luna, and even then, only once. Ragnar remained there beneath the full moon, black fur spread behind him across the stone, while his amber eyes stayed fixed entirely on Selene's face with the unwavering certainty of a man who had already made his decision long before this moment arrived. She was condemned on false accusations. Ragnar said, his voice condemned on false accusations. Ragnar said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the valley. She was rejected by her pack without trial. She was sent to the cursed tower to disappear. The moonlight intensified against Selene's skin as the bond pulsed violently between them. Ragnar never looked away from her. She was never cursed, he said quietly. She was chosen. The words landed through the valley like something ancient recognizing itself at last. And before every Alpha standing here tonight, I am claiming Selene of the Moon bloodline as my Luna and the rightful heir to the bloodline your councils tried to erase. Then Ragnar rose slowly to his feet. The bond detonated between them completely. Not violently this time, completely. The force of it swept through the valley in a wave every wolf present physically felt beneath their skin, ancient, absolute, irreversible. Selene looked at Ragnar standing before her beneath the enormous white moon, black armor catching silver light, while amber eyes held hers with devastating steadiness. The Alpha King who climbed a cursed tower alone. The man who crossed kingdoms because her pain reached him through a bond neither of them understood yet. The man who looked at her like survival itself had become personal. Selene exhaled slowly, emotion tightening unexpectedly beneath her ribs. You could have just asked me, she said quietly, because even now she could not fully stop herself from saying exactly what she thought. A faint smile touched Ragnar's mouth. Small, real, dangerous in ways battle never was. I was going to, he said. But this way everyone heard it. And beneath the same moon that watched her dragged from a mating ceremony in disgrace, the same moon that watched the tower try to erase her piece by piece, the same moon that watched Ragnar ride 3 sleepless days across the continent to reach her, destiny finally arrived exactly where it had always been moving all along. Not toward a curse, toward a queen. She was rejected, condemned, and sent to a place built to make sure no one ever found her. She lost her memories, her strength, her wolf, everything except the one thing they couldn't take, no matter how deep the darkness went. The will to still be there when the door finally opened. And it did open, not because fate is gentle, and not because justice always wins, but because somewhere north of everything she'd ever known, a bond refused to stay quiet, and an Alpha King refused to stay seated. He didn't save her because she was a queen. He didn't ride through a storm and climb a cursed tower because of bloodlines or prophecies or political alliances. He went because something inside him recognized something inside her across hundreds of miles and iron walls and a curse old enough to have forgotten its own name. And that recognition didn't ask for permission and didn't wait for a convenient moment. It just pulled. And he followed. Maybe that's what it always comes down to. Not the crowns or the wars or the ancient marks burning on your skin. Just someone who feels the thread and chooses, every single time, to follow it back to you. So tell me, have you ever felt like Celine, invisible, rejected, convinced that the story had already been written without you in it? Do you believe that even the coldest hearts can learn to cross a continent for the right person? Leave it in the comments. This story lives in your answers as much as it does in mine. And if alpha kings who kneel for no one, forbidden bonds, and girls who were built to survive found a place in your heart tonight, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and come back. Because under this moon, there are always more stories waiting, more towers, more kings who ride without permission, more girls who were never meant to be chosen, but always, always are.